Thank you so much. Then we start immediately our fourth and last session of this series of training on good regulatory practices and their implementation in medical devices, as well as in other occasions. I'd like to reconfirm that we're recording it for to be in the coalition website, including the materials that were shared. We also have simultaneous interpretation into English. You can have access to simultaneous interpretation on the lower right-hand side of your computers. The microphones of all participants, again, are in silence to avoid background noise. Therefore, we'd like to put your questions in the Q&A. Of course, you can include them in the chat. However, if the conversations accrue, we have the risk of losing them and not giving an answer to them. And we lost her. And if you have your cameras on, please, when you participate, to facilitate the work of our interpreter. Today, we have the privilege, and we want to thank you dearly for the participation of Miriam Loera from the international area in COFEPRIS, and all our panelists, Alejandra Bloomberg from the Pan American Health Organization, Juan Carlos Rivera from NORMS, and Ms. Salgado from the Ministry of Economy, Nathan Enriquez from COFEPRIS, as well as Gabriel Cortez, Monica Telles, and Felipe de la Sancha, Rafael Hernandez from our Pharmacopoeia, and Ritelme from AMIT, and Jorge Daniel from Canifarma. Thank you to all our panelists. And I'd like to give the floor to Miriam Loera to share her welcoming address. So thank you so much, Sandra. Good afternoon, everyone. For me, it is a great pleasure and very happy to have you in this last session of our good regulatory practices of medical devices. It's been very enriching, and I'm very pleased to have the participation in each and every one of you. Therefore, we want to celebrate the alliance, and so for the protection Miriam, we stopped listening to you. Miriam, we stopped listening to you. We cannot hear you. And nobody can hear her, or it's again my team. Nobody can hear her. I cannot hear either. Nobody can hear, and we lost the connection. Give me a second to see this technical issue. We're just waiting for them to solve it. One second, please. We cannot reestablish the communication. Please, if you can hold on a second. I think that we reestablished the communication medium. Yes, I'd like to apologize because of the technical difficulties. So, to delay times more. Thank you so much to everyone, to each of you in this last session. We've had participations in good regulatory practices in medical devices in the Alliance for Norms with the Coalition, International Coalition of Medical Devices, NRC, and all the international, the United States group to carry out this workshop and reach from international organizations like the World Health Organization, the Pan American Health Organization, and our government institutions such as the Ministry of Economy, and the General Direction of Norms, the Ministry of Foreign Trade, as well as the Pharmacopoeia of the United States of Mexico here present, and of course, the valuable areas of COFEPRIS that support us with the regulation of medical devices. It's a pleasure to welcome on behalf of our Federal Commissioner, Dr. Alejandro Slash, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you, Miriam. So now we are going to listen to Ricardo Aranda. He's going to coordinate the roundtable. For all participants, we'd like to ask you, when we have the materials published in this network, you will be able to have visibility of the panelists that have the honor of being with us today for to shorten times and to dedicate it to the discussion that we know is going to be very enriching. Ricardo, please go.
Muchas gracias, Sandra.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. Thank you to the coalition for inviting us to moderate this important session. I also want to thank the COFEPRIS for their opportunity to be involved in this event. And also on behalf of Juan Antonio Dorantes, greetings from him. It is a great pleasure to moderate the session with such distinguished members of speakers. The session today, the last session of this training, is going to be focused in a different dynamic from the previous one. And now we saw throughout the first part of this training how have we negotiated international commitments and how have we been adapting them and promoting the adoption of good regulatory practices. Later on, we reviewed also their application in the Mexican context, and we grounded even further in the development of technical regulations in Mexico. Today, we are going to carry out an exchange, a discussion where we are going to have questions aimed at the different speakers that I am going to invite to give us an answer to be able to expand the content of what has already been discussed throughout these 4 sessions of training. And still, I would like to open up the possibility to have interventions of the different speakers that the question is aimed at in order to complement the information or promote a greater discussion of what we're dealing with. And regarding I would like to talk with a question. I'd like to open up with a question aimed at COFEPRIS and to the Mexican Medical Device Association that, as I know, with a priority towards these 2 speakers, so we are going to give the possibility for other participants to participate. And the question emerges because in these sessions, we've understood that the efficient regulation of medical devices contributes to the strengthening of the health system. There is no question about it. Nevertheless, it is also very important to know what are the opportunities that we can appreciate from the public sector and private sector, as well as areas that require a possible implementation of good regulatory practices in the medical devices sector from the outlook of COFEPRIS. What opportunities can be appreciated from the Mexican industry? What are the opportunities that we can appreciate to implement good regulatory practices in medical device sector? I'd like to give the floor to COFEPRIS. If we have there Monica Telles with us to refer to this, and then I'd like to give the floor to Ana Riquera. Yes, good afternoon. And from the public sector standpoint and with a focus into the responsibility area. And we are not only a regulatory authority that applies the regulations that have been established, but we've also done ongoing improvements. Our regulatory bodies have to be compatible with good regulatory practices, the legal framework, and they are good to protect the patients and to regulate medical devices from the production, marketing, surveillance, and in some cases, their discontinuation. And so we've done a lot of work. We have the legal framework. We have a sanitary code since 73, up to the last reforms that we did to the inputs for health the document that was until 2021. But in that year, 1973 to these reforms of 2021, we've had the regulation of inputs, the first edition of medical devices in 2006, the update with the fourth edition, and a norm published that was 137 2008, a norm of good manufacturing practices of medical devices, the 241, the norm of surveillance 240, and these work are ongoing. These are a very important challenge because we're not only talking about one type of use, but dozens of products with several levels of categories and complexities. And right now, in the specific case, and in our legal framework, they do exist, these instruments that I pointed out. However, with relevant topics to safeguard within the regulatory convergence and good regulatory practices, among some of the ones that we could mention are the good manufacturing practices of the medical devices. COFEPRIS issued a new version of the official Mexican norm 241, and we consider 18 months as the term to adjust all the processes and to work in the implementation. So we as COFEPRIS will do whatever it takes for our internal processes. And also, it's going to be necessary to adjust some regulatory software devices for medical devices, and the review and update of the norm 137 of labeling of medical devices and the supplement of the pharmacopoeia and the application to the norm 240 of thermosurveillance. And it's also true that there's international support, but it could also be that it requires an update on behalf of, I'm sorry, but there's somebody making a lot of noise, so maybe they could turn all the microphones off. So we're going to have international guides for this review and update. So all of these inputs for sure are going to be part of the regulatory matters, and they will give greater certainty. And that is all. Thank you so much. Thank you, Monica. And thank you, Monica. We understand that as a result of the answer, so aside from looking at opportunities, and we have to see the implementation, so for medical devices. So it is true that, so I'd like to make an additional comment. The regulatory changes after the ones that you made reference to are going to they're going to include the good practices, the good regulatory practices. So right now, I'd like to give the floor to Ana Riquelme from AMID. In case she has any additional comments, please share it with us. Ana, please. Yes, of course. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank the Regulatory Convergence Commission to inviting me to this important workshop. I also want to thank all the players that are as panelists in this panel, by being able to speak with us is going to be very enriching for medical devices. Therefore, to start, what I wanted to tell you for our sector, it is of great relevance to have a real interest for the implementation of good regulatory practices. Therefore, the celebration of this webinar is a very good beginning about this topic. We've been speaking about it throughout the years, and we know that every time we're more and more professionalized on this topic as a concept. This relevance implies that Mexican patients can enjoy the medical technology that these devices provide in our health system, but also they're the basis to create competitiveness in Mexico. As a result of the beforehand, COFEPRIS, as mentioned in the previous presentation, all the norms and all the regulations that have to do with medical devices. However, according to good regulatory practices, are the process to create the regulation, not only the regulation itself. And therefore, there are two very important concepts that we've seen throughout the days that have gone by, and these are convergence, and that imply the alignment of standards. This standard alignment allows the industry established in Mexico to be able to be aligned to what happens in the world, to face the challenges of production and distribution, and later on we are going to tell the sanitary people to have, and they have to talk about good sanitary practices to see what are these firm steps that we have to give from now on, and they mean to revisit as a result of what we're living with the MEC, what are these processes that we have to fine tune. Everything that has been achieved from the human beings can be perfectible. Where can we generate the next results in order to be sure that the norms that are created or implemented in an ongoing basis are going to be according to international standards, and that they are not a customized suit for the production in Mexico, because this doesn't change competitiveness, and this doesn't allow the medical devices through access, and the time of supply can go to a good end. So it is very important for us. It's important for FEPRIS because they're always the opening door to Mexico. And if COFEPRIS is not committed of good regulatory practices, the product doesn't go to the final patient. And this is something we've seen with this case of the pandemic due to COVID-19. If COFEPRIS is not implementing new processes, like the digitation is one important one. So practically the patient cannot enjoy the product. Therefore, from up to here, my participation, and thank you so much. And thank you for the message, and very accurate, and also certainly complementary to what has been shared by COFEPRIS. Is there any observation, any additional comment? And let me tell you, to those that are listening to us, that as an audience to this event, and if we finish the exchanges of the questions that are referring to, we'll open up a space for Q&A so that the audience can intervene their concerns and with the speakers. If there's no additional comment on behalf of the speakers, and I'm going to refer to Mr. Alejandra. So regarding the regional outlook, so what is a regional outlook in order to apply good regulatory practices, and how the process of convergence is taking place? So from the UPS, what are the suggestions that could happen in this case for Mexico and the countries in the region about regulatory practices that we have to assign priorities to? We're identifying what are the elements that are important for the implementations through a question that has done to COFEPRIS, and now we are going to have the regional perspective. So what is the appreciation that we have in this sense, the UPS? So Alejandro, please. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the invitation. I want to thank COFEPRIS for this kind of invitation. and also the coalition for the organization of this important event. And I am Shadi Gruber. I am the regional advisor for medical devices in the Pan American Health Organization. And first of all, I wanted to tell you that this is a perfect moment for this discussion, in particular because for some reasons, because we, the member states in the region, in the Americas, are going to be in the next few months, and we are having a very important presentation because strengthening the regulatory points are going to be ready in the next board of directors of next year. And our team here in the OPS is working already in the documents that are going to be presented to the member states as of the executive committee of UPS and also the board of directors. So why do I mention this? Because as you know, there is a resolution adopted in 2010, the CD 49, but this is one of the specific resolutions about medication regulation. And at the end, we have been able to ensure that we are incorporating the need of the regulation as part of this regional framework. Therefore, one of the main reasons to see this resolution in order to incorporate the positive, to have a better explanation of this discussion is going to be present with the good regulatory practices and the document that is going to be discussed and presented next year in the board of directors. So first of all, I'd like to share that because I think it is very, very important from the regional perspective. Since 2012, we have a regional working team with the medical devices COFEPRIS from the very beginning, since its foundation was present as a founding member of this regional group, and today has more than 25 countries that are participating in this group. And we are very, very pleased to incorporate also a new regulatory that is the FDR from the United States that today, a few weeks back, truly has started, was incorporated to this regional group. And also, as part of the activity of this group, we have very close collaboration with the International Medical Device Regulators Forum. COFEPRIS has participated in several meetings and in previous occasions. But as we know, we only have three member countries in the region, effective members that are Anvisa, FDA, and MDA Canada. And recently, Argentina and ELMAT has been accepted as an official observer. So therefore, OPS has a participation as an institution that is acknowledged, an institution acknowledged in order to harmonize work in a regional harmonization. And we also have the participation as well as observers in this forum. Therefore, there are several activities that are very important. However, because of the topic that we're working on, the good practices, good regulatory practices, there is a group of MRDF about that, and we have the regional presentation aside from several other topics, such as the clinical evaluation of medical devices, personalized devices, in vitro diagnosis, clinical evaluation of in vitro evaluations. Some of them, we have participation in some of them, and this is one of the recommendations I'd like to make, would be that it would be very important to have the participation of COFEPRIS in one of these MDRF groups. So as a result, OPS can indicate that we have the right to indicate participants in the region about these groups, and I would invite really for COFEPRIS to participate in the groups that they consider like the good practices group. And also we have here our regional groups that we call mirror groups. And in these mirror groups, we had all the topics, because at this point, the topics are the same priority topics, where we identified the priority topics for our countries, and we call them as mirror groups. And there is a mirror group exactly of good practices, good regulatory practices, where we have that is coordinated by INVIMA from Colombia, and with the participation of several countries, included COFEPRIS is member of several of these work groups, and I recall the exchange of the devices, and COFEPRIS is a member and has shared with us several reports of several devices in this group that now it has turned from a work team into an effective program that is called REGMA program for exchange of events. And other groups that we had, because of time, I cannot tell you, but I want to concentrate in the groups that I just mentioned now. And also, we've worked in disseminating the information that is important documents about the initiative of the MRDF Forum. We also have 6 documents established in Spanish, 3 in Portuguese, and now we're finalizing 12 documents in Spanish of the MRDF to facilitate the dissemination of these documents in the American region. Another topic that I feel is important to finish is that it's essential in this context, the construction of capacities. Therefore, I wanted to congratulate the initiative of doing webinars and virtual workshops for training purposes, because we, UPS and the regional group, are dedicated and have dedicated lots of efforts in the training process, because we've had training courses that were developed by INVIMA. I wanted to mention INVIMA from Colombia, and also SICMEDI from Cuba, that is a collaborating center for positive devices. And these courses are available. In this moment, even, there is one INVIMA course with the participation of 9 COFEPRIS officials about techno-surveillance. Therefore, I think this is 125 participants at this point in this course that was developed by INVIMA. PSA has coordinated its dissemination and summoning of participating countries. Also, we had a series of training of the REDMA to exchange with more than 15 participating countries. And we also had a series of activities that were related to workshops, scholarships, and other courses that we give them for the Caribbean countries. That was for the first time that we had courses translated into English that we have been able to accomplish. We also have practice communities to exchange information and a series of virtual meetings. And finally, we wanted to make emphasis into activities at a global level that, of course, we had the participation, effective participation, and one of them is the publication of the regulatory framework, and COFEPRIS participates in the discussion at a global level, and now we're in the process of updating these publications with several contributions from the countries in the region. And another one, I know that COFEPRIS has had an active participation and has made emphasis in the importance of this work, that is the construction of the new information tool, the global benchmarking tool, that is going to incorporate, as of next year, a component of medical devices. So global benchmarking, global medical devices. So it incorporates indicators for the regions that we've done, that has been very well developed to create these indications with pilot testing. But now with the OMS, we are going to start, as of next year, to have pilot studies, to do pilot assessments, to have an assessment that will also incorporate medical devices. And that's why we have to have good practices nowadays. And in order to finish, I'd like to say that in the COVID-19 context, there was a series of very important activities. And I'd like to congratulate COFEPRIS, because and due to and other regulators that have had an essential role and an essential answer in COVID-19 and the challenges of the pandemic, the challenges that the pandemic has caused by the regulatory authorities and giving us quick answers to these challenges has really been a very important challenge. And the OPS also many challenges, and I wanted to highlight some very briefly, such as the need of rejecting the quality of the medical devices under the COVID response when it's the biomedical equipment, the ventilators, and other very important equipment, and also the diagnosis test for COVID. And also the purchases done by UPS needed to ensure the quality of the product. We needed to make quality assurance and look for the information from the regulating authorities in the region to be able to have the proper confidence in these products that were offered to the countries, and the importance and the satisfaction of this regional team, the topic of diagnosis and protection of ventilators, and a series of activities that have been very important under the COVID response. So I wanted, and because of time, I know that there's many other panelists that are going to participate, but I'm going to stop here. And once again, I wanted to congratulate you and tell you we have many challenges, but we have this discussion of the resolution, of the new resolution, is going to give us the opportunity of progressing in this discussion in the region. And I would like to tell you that we're already planning to have a meeting with our regional team at the end of March, beginning of April of next year. And for sure, we're going to have very active participation of COFEPRIS under that context. And thank you so much for the opportunity. And I'm open for any questions that you might have. Thank you, Alejandro. And it's been a fantastic response. It's been very clear, very detailed about the agenda, and because of the opportunities that are emerging for the involvement, we have this presentation that has been presented before COFEPRIS with better emphasis in the EMDRF. And if you allow me, if you have no inconveniences, Alejandra, to ask additionally to make another inquiry, and the work that is done in the International Regulators Forum, and there is incorporated within the devices of the free trade agreement, and about good regulatory practices, and in the CPTPP, because the Trans-Pacific Association and the treaty between Mexico and Canada. So what is the opinion that there is a commercial agenda for discussion, and that is adopting good regulatory, is pushing for good regulatory practices, and so how can we perceive as a contribution, as an area of opportunity, because the discussion about the application of these devices is part of the free trade agreements. Therefore, what is your opinion on that? So thank you for the question. And this is not an easy answer. However, we see it with great opportunity. And however, these are meaningful challenges. And previous to my work in OPS, I am I've been an advisor for the last 10 years, and I've worked for more than 10 years in Visa in the regulatory agency in Brazil. And one of the representatives of Anvisa and Mercosur for many years we had worked with the Mercosur devices, and we knew the challenges that mean this convergence, that mean that we have to find agreements, that everybody can be flexible in some points, and we gave some points and reach a common agreement on clear matters. And why do we have this type of discussions? In the next discussions, we've participated in meetings since 2014. In all the meetings I was present. And of course, we're talking about another type of forum, but there we had to also look for agreements where we're able to look for convergence. And that is why we talk about the harmonization, because harmonizing in many cases means that we have to postpone agreements for many, many years to come. And I think it is even more feasible to talk about looking for convergence, that maybe there's no perfect harmonization. However, there is going to be key points on good practices, for example, and other regulatory points where there is agreements that allow us to progress in for strengthening the regulatory layers. So there are challenges in this regard, but however, I see this as an opportunity to strengthen them. Very, very well. Thank you so much, Alejandre, for the response to this both points. I'm going to refer to an aspect, an accurate aspect regarding the opinion of the United Mexican States Pharmacopoeia. I'd like to give the floor to Rafael Hernandez to talk and refer to an evolution in the regulatory frameworks on what are the controls that are related. If you could please turn your microphones. Thank you. Thank you so much. I apologize. I was listening to a lot of echo. Before an development and evolution in regulatory controls in regarding medical devices in the environment that this applies, what are the improvements that can be foreseen in the next edition of medical devices in order to ensure the quality and security of innovative products used in Mexico? And these improvements, specifically, we wanted to know them about the application of good practices, such as the alignment and with the compliance of others contents and international matters, and regarding good regulatory practices. And I'm going to give the floor to Rafael. So we cannot hear you. And so the microphone is still off. In COFEPRIS, the mic is off. It's still turned off. So, perfect. So, so we want to thank the COFEPRIS and so for the pharmacopoeia. And here we are going to talk about the process and to align with good regulatory practices. And in this sense, I feel that when we talk about improvements, we have to think about 3 levels. From the pharmacopoeia level, the improvements in the process. Also, we have to see what are the improvements in infrastructure and in contents. So when we talk about the improvements in the process in order to align to good regulatory practices, fortunately enough, this year we had the publication at the beginning of the new version of the norm 62 SA, and it talks to us about the process of updating the contents of pharmacopoeia. And this new version is very important because in the spirit of the norm, we see reflected in this new version the principles that are aligned with good practices that are the relevant, and that there should be some consensus that we should strengthen the consumption mechanisms, but even more so that we should open transparency and openness mechanisms so all the players match and agree on the contents. Unfortunately enough, these improvements of processes is not limited with the new version of the norm, and we are there regarding the infrastructure improvements. We are living in these weeks a process that best describes the internal operation rules of the Permanent Commission of the Pharmacopoeia of Mexico, that is the ratification and rectification process, and an advising body of the Ministry of Health. COFEPRIS is a group of 250 specialists of the highest level of knowledge in the different areas. And within these areas, we exactly have the group that is dedicated to medical devices. These groups and these technical groups that are the essence of the advisory group of the Permanent Commission have a duration of 2 years. It's a biannual process, so we are in these weeks going through this ratification and rectification process, and it's a good moment where we can see strengthened with new players, the integration of experts. Now we cannot hear him again. The sound went away, Rafael. So if you could help us in that. I think that we can hear him again. Thank you. So the third perspective of the improvements that we have that is focused on which are the innovations that we're going to have in medical devices. And it's also important to know the times, because next, for medical devices, we've foreseen for the next quarter, and that means that the topics that we have to set forth to make sure that the entrenching of the so in the norm, so they have to be inquiries to users for next year, and that the final result is going to be seen in the publication in the 5th edition at the end of the year. Now, the topics that we see that are relevant, that are conducted with the need of looking at other legal harmonizations are 3 that are exactly in this medical devices. And I apologize, we cannot hear very well. We have very clear that there is a very large progress in biocompatibility. So the topic related to biocompatibility is a space that we had left like that, and the Pharmacopoeia left it like that 2 years ago. We've published in the supplement 2020 and 2019 elements that are perfectly well aligned with ISO 1993. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are already international rules and regulations that we're aligning with. This is the trend in the world. And also, we already have the infrastructure in Mexico of the laboratories that can carry out the evaluation of these methodologies, lab methodologies. So in this sense, we will continue working because the series of norms is very large, is very extensive, and we will continue updating the corresponding points. So the second point that has a lot of relevance is that the norm 241 is going to demand from us to establish stability, and we'll address appendixes for sure. How and with what criteria shall we follow the stability studies for those cases where that applies to medical devices? It's very clear for those that have been formulated, but there's other cases where we speak about aging instead of stabilities, and we are going to do the corresponding adjustments, but it's already in the permanent condition of the pharmacopoeia. And another topic that has been quite relevant has implied the modification from the definition of what a medical device is, and the classification rules is, we also have to align ourselves to these exercises that have done by MDR and others that have a lot of experience, even if this is an incipient task in the world. All regulatory agencies have the same concerns. We have to address this topic. We have to set it forth in the following months these are the contents that we would be incorporating in the fifth edition. And I also would like to mention that to see how valuable it is to work through the pharmacopoeia to strengthen the norms, taking advantage that this is a very agile tool, and every year we could do updates in the context of the pandemic. It plays a very important role on behalf of COFEPRIS to carry out the sanitary health. And we are going to, the immediate reaction that we're going to have in the General Pharmacopoeia are the corresponding monographies that they generated in record time in public inquiries, and they were incorporated in the year. So these monographies, and they are still under review, and this year we're going to incorporate them by exception in the publication in the Pharmacopoeia in the United Mexican States 13.0 that we have available in December of this year, that updates the monographies that appeared in 2020. And this talks to us about the fact that the Pharmacopoeia can have the speed to talk about emergency topics in case of competition. So I just wanted to close with this contribution that the Pharmacopoeia has in emergency-related topics. Thank you so much. And thank you for the comment. And we are seeing comments throughout the chat about the video conference, pointing out that there's concern because we don't hear well and that there are variations in the sound. Personally, I heard the intervention of Rafael that was complete. However, the technical colleagues are working to do the improvements that have to be implemented to ensure there's no failures on the sound. I apologize for those that have had problems listening. If there's no other comments on this topic, I'd like to tell you and about the perspectives on the short run for the implementation of the new regulatory practices in the next edition in the supplements of medical devices. And I'd like to give the floor to the negotiating team in Mexico that is in charge of the administration of free trade agreements and the participation in forums such as we have Viviana from the Ministry of Economy that I'd like to address this question in the administration of forums and particularly in the World Health Organization. So regarding technical obstacles where they're discussing the concerns and regarding the adoption and in technical matters and assessments of that can be applied. And what are the questions and what are the concerns that we set forth that are mentioned on behalf of the members and about the lack of applications of good practices, regulatory practices. And this is an agenda that in the framework of this committee, we've looked to create lists, illustrative lists, and so horizontal lists that show what are the good practices. And in this sense, and the question is, so what are the questions that you're setting forth today? Now, thank you, Ricardo. Good afternoon. I just wanted to confirm if you can hear me well. Yes, we can hear you perfectly well. Thank you so much. And on your question, I'm going to go to the context and the technical barriers they gather 3 times a year. This is a forum where members can show their commercial concerns that are specific about technical regulations, and we issue or adopt. And so the participation that Mexico has, so in coordination and with different government dependencies, and with the industry, with the national committee that gathers 3 times a year before the OMC to the World Health Organization. And regarding the type of concerns, these are diverse. However, mainly these are about the additional information or clarification of some matters regarding the technical norms or procedures to assess according that have been notified. The second most common reason has to do with the principle of proportionality to the identification, and that could have necessary barriers. And the third one is about the non-compliance regarding transparency, that the measure was not notified, that so they were not notified. And so we don't have comments because we can reserve feedback about this measure. And this is one of the points. And this is the use of international norms, because we have to question that a norm or a procedure, according to the conformity, is not online with international practices. So in spite of the members in the OMC, so they have the freedom of not basing themselves in international norms. We do have this obligation of justifying the deviation or the omission of the use of the norm. So each of the countries is free. If in the search of looking for a legitimate, you don't use an international norm, you're mandated to use it. But if you do not use it, that you have to see the questions, why wasn't it used, under the understanding that international tasks are done in order to avoid discrepancies that are greater among countries and looking for homologation. And so another one is the discrimination between national and imported products and national treaties, when a measure that is issued by some country benefits a national product and has some issues or some procedures, additional procedures for imported type of products, or also the omission of not granting a provisional term. We also have in the OMC an agreement that the term on technical matters and cannot be under 6 months. And on the other hand, we're also facing two measures that are notified to countries and they come in effect immediately. And entonces we are adapting these productions, and so they're not online within your regulations. And these are the reasons that there's more concern, commercial specific concerns. And I'm going to take the time to show you something on the screen, just to show you all of this information in a more graphic manner. And now there is another one. And can you see this? So yes, so this is a public page from the MCO that now, so here we can see the concerns that have happened from, this is an historical of 1995 to 2021. And so we go to the graph on the left. These are the commercial specific concerns debated in each of the meetings since 1995 to 2021. There are 3 meetings per year. The 3 meetings are the 3 times where this committee meets. And here getting into all the connections, because here you can see the concerns that we're having. And so now, in the last committee, we are seeing this. Now we are doing the notifications, and so there's been more notifications. So we've created and we've strengthened the commitment of the countries to notify the measures. To notify the measures, they allow us not only informing the countries about what they're doing, but they also allow the participation in international public inquiries. That is very important because this is the last official path to offer comments or to be part of these measures that at the end have an impact in international trade. And this same graph here, you can see the frequency that a commercial concern happens in the meetings, usually. And here we are going to show you, but this has to be reiterated to reach agreements that so that there are some benefits. And the most important graph in terms of the question that they're asking me is the type of concern that has been set forth. So here we have the reasons that I was sharing at the very beginning. And what we ask ourselves more are reasons to clarify or additional information about the proportionality, transparency, and we have declared matters. So so this has a legitimate reason. So this goal is through which a government supports, and in this curve, I'm following a support, and the protection to health and security is security of people is a main goal that can be found where they have these reasons. And now I'm going to continue with the use of the platform. There's also a map that is part of the public information that we have, where we can see in this case, and Mexico stands out because we're doing from here the presentation. And here we can see each of the countries. You can choose each of the countries like Mexico. And here you have the history of each and every one of the concerns that Mexico has and has received. The commercial specific concerns that the Mexican government has presented and other measures of other countries, and also the concerns that other countries have questions about regulations that Mexico has issued or implemented. So here we can see a little bit in a graphic way the participation that Mexico has had, because we're not only going to the committee to show a concern, but we're also clarifying questions about measures that we've introduced. And this graph summarizes and can also tell each of the members of the World Health Organization to know a little bit the story. And if you can go to each of the numbers, as in my screen, you can see the backgrounds. So here you have the background. It takes you to the commercial, to the World Trade Organization and the concern of the World Trade Organization or the WTO. Another tool is this ping. This is a free platform. Anybody can subscribe. This ping platform can filter the notifications you want to receive. In the specific case of medical devices, you enroll and you're only interested in receiving notification about medical devices, you put them in the filter, and you're going to get all the notifications that go to the technical barriers of commerce about medical devices of all the countries. That way, you'll have the follow-up of how the medical framework is changing, at least in the world, regarding medical devices. So we have unjustified barriers, and in order to identify them, and as a government, we're able to help them in providing follow-up to them and clarifying as much as possible the concern or looking for a resolution that is effective for both parties. Therefore, this is my answer, Ricardo. I hope the information has been useful to all of the people here present in this seminar. And if there's any additional question, we'll be more than happy to answer. Thank you so much. So thank you, Viviana, for the information that certainly grounds or lands the comments made by the first session of these training where we speak about the principles, we speak about the way that how they have evolved. And this is a way that in the day-to-day we manage these commitments. So another question that we have regarding the internet site that you showed us, is it one or there are two internet sites? Are they for public access or they are for any party interested in order to review this information? Well, these are two internet sites, and one of them where they look for the notification is Speed Alert. I can put it in the chat. And the other one is that and EMS, and I can also put it in the chat. Both of them, the World Trade Organization, you can go to the map because it's kind of a profile and you can see there the performance each of the countries has had, and it sends you to the Mexican map, and it is going to be moved, and you can move the cursor to change country. So I will show you both links in the chat for all of you to have them. They are free access, and the notifications, the additional point is for you to register so you can do the notifications of what you want to receive. And if you're interested, and in the Ministry of Economy, what we do in a two-way basis is our technical barriers, technicians, and that is in this national committee, we send them in a two-weekly manner all the notifications that are raised in the platform. In other words, everything that we receive from Ping Alert, we send it every 2 weeks. However, this is we compile all the notifications. It's not per sector. That is why we do the registration and for each person to select the sector that they're interested in to receive the notifications. Nevertheless, I'd like to put the links in the chat for all of you to be able to explore the pages. And if you have any questions, I'm going to put my email in case you want to write to me. Thank you so much. Perfect, Viviana. As a matter of fact, there's a question in the chat about what are these pages, and I'd like you to please include them regarding as well as your contact information as you offer. They can address you directly. And now we can see part of the regulatory entities of different sectors. And now because the authority and COFEPRIS is also part of this national committee, the DGN, and Senasica, Semarnat, we have a wide summoning, and the National Committee also, they don't have just one procedure per se to be part of, but if there's an interested party of the private sector to be part of, this is a committee where we see different topics, where we inform you from the technical barrier discipline, what are the progress in international trade, what are we negotiating, and of course, these reports, to call them somehow, in the participation of Mexico in the OTC committee. And we also inform you how you can have a specific concern so they can identify to be a guide to be presented in the World Health Trade Organization, and we can give the resolutions. And if you want to give any follow-up to my presentation, I will be more than ready to answer. And thank you for the information. So now we are in the Ministry of the Economy, but also switching areas. So I'm going to go to the norms. And this is the area that is also this emission of the law of infrastructure of quality in the National Infrastructure Committee. And we, in this sense, they go with us, Juan Carlos Rivera, Torres, they are moderators. So I'd like to know from the norms direction, what are the areas of opportunities in the work that you do regarding good regulatory practice implementation what, how can you identify and what are the recommendations that result from the regulatory impact estimation, in particular regarding comments that are received from interested parties of people that present their comments as part of the public inquiries that develop in each of the measures and projects as of international commitments? I'd like to give the floor to the norms committee. First, Carlos, then Victor, or whomever you would like to start. Ricardo, hi, and Victor. And in this occasion, I'm going to start. Thank you so much. And going to the question and the questioning that you're asking. As you well know, the norms head office through like the executive office of the National Quality Assurance head and the normalizing committee that is the Ministry um, of Economy. What we are doing is for this areas of opportunities in the interinstitutional work, we establish a procedure to elaborate the Mexican social norms. And we have we also organize we are going to issue the norms to so that the different organizations that are in charge of the norms to match what they are going to issue. So the starting point of this work is a national program of quality infrastructure. This is a document, or this is the instrument where we put a list of each of the topics that we're going to be dealing with in the next year calendar for each of the normalizing organizations. There is where this work comes in on behalf of the National Quality Infrastructure Commission that is in charge by Mr. Guatirrojo, and he sends his greetings to all of you and apologizes for not being present. However, once you integrate this and we receive these topics and we integrate the National Quality Infrastructure Program, the executive does this analysis work, does this work of identifying what are the topics that could match within those that have been subscribed by all the organizations to identify this interinstitutional work. And going back to the good practices, the good regulatory practices in the regulation that we're developing nowadays, you can find that it's in development, and we hope to give you very good notes on the publications and progress. And we're also considering that as part of the development of this procedure of normalization and elaboration and modification of the Mexican official norms, as well as the collaboration organism of the different bodies, we are always willing to respect the good practices. We're always willing to match up all the different processes into one. And this has been a topic that has been mentioned a lot because today different authorities work with very particular procedures, but the idea is to match them up, to to standardize them, and always considering the good regulatory practices, international practices at their foundation, because these international good practices are our foundations, and we're always using them through our different instruments. I was also mentioning, to finish this first part, is that we had two very days that were full of meetings, that we had a direct contact with each of the authorities to speak as a result of the analysis that I was mentioning to you that was done regarding the National Quality Infrastructure Program for 2022. We had a couple of days, yesterday and the day before, where we had lots of communications with all the organizing committees in order to speak and in order to understand if the vision and the analysis of this commission or the secretariat was the right place to look for this interinstitutional work, to look for these, to observe these good practices, and always with the aim in mind of finding a norm per sector or matter. We do not want to have different instruments issued by different normalizing institutions. So part of the work is be able to align the efforts and that is in an orderly way. And so attending these good regulatory practices, and this would be all. Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you, Victor. We're going to give the floor to Juan Carlos. And Ricardo, this is such a pleasure to say hello to you and good afternoon, everyone. An apology because I think that you can hear me here very well. Thank you so much. So adding to this response that Victor has just given us, we would also like to comment that one of the main recommendations that we have and that we've had because of these good practices and those that are embedded in this type of medical devices is that they should approach the organizations that generate standards, and to their participation is the soul of these documents, and with the technical expertise they enrich information because we have to consider them within these elaborations of rules and regulations. I was mentioning Raphael, an ISO norm. Not only we have ISO norms, we have EIT, we have also norms in other countries or standards from the countries like the US and Canada that provide different solutions, but they attend the same problem. And this same problem is that the programs are safe. And now one of the main points that we wanted to mention is that the amplitude and this acceptance to different solutions, not only from some entity or some institution, because this is going to respond differently to each of the situations that are mentioned in each in the first part, and as mentioned in public inquiry and feedback, in international feedback and national feedback. These are also key elements that could contribute to these elements that we could provide feedback about these good practices and how do they impact and match to the medical the products. And I could talk about a medical active equipment where we have an electric safety, not to have an electric shock, not to ignite, and it could be severe. And so the Mexican rules, according to 241, that assesses this process of manufacturing and good practices for the manufacturing, we have a context that is wider because in this economy, or globalized economy, we have a lot of imports and we have a lot of products that might not be the right ones. So we also need to implement the filters and security measures so we can avoid that products enter into the country that don't have these practices, and we have the attachment of NOM that require what products can go in. And now we have to have the participation of the UPS and the World Health Organization. As Viviana said, this is a topic that could be enriched a lot, that doesn't have to be restrictive, that could accept many options and many solutions. And one of the priorities is to have this cooperation and coherence, and in particular, communication. Communication is clear to speak and look at all the technical elements and reach our regulations and our practices. So thank you so much, and we're at your service. Thank you to the two of you. Thank you, Juan Carlos and Victor. A very important point that is not always obvious is something that was mentioned by Juan Carlos. In the case of Mexico, the elaboration of measures is not only limited to the process that takes place in the working places and in the Consultative National Committee for Normalization that is in charge of elaborating the Mexican official norms and their so the demand from this entrance point, and also in this instruments and documents that are issued, like the famous Mexican regulations, the application of good regulatory practices is very relevant. Right now, I'm going to go turn the camera to our coffee priest friends so that they can help us and they could talk about the adoption of good regulatory practices in the specific sector of medical devices, so they can talk to us about if we understand that digitation is a tool, is a to apply good regulatory practices, what are the actions or what are the strategies that are being explored or that are happening right now to promote more digitation in the regulatory processes for medical devices? Nathan Enriquez, I'd like to give the floor, and I would like to thank you for your participation. Nathan, go ahead from COFEPRIS. Nathan, we cannot hear you. I think it's happening what happened with Rafael. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can hear you. So thank you so much for the opportunity of participating in this such important forum, because this information has been very enriching to hear your point of view and the contribution also of each of the participants. And I also want to thank for allowing me to participate in this workshop that concludes with this table. And for COFEPRIS has been very important because it has allowed us to have this exchange of experiences and knowledge. And of course, one of the topics that are important for us are the digitation. How does it apply? How does it apply to this challenge that are medical devices? So no question, the technological development in health and well-being has generated a great diversity of important dimensions because on the one hand, it represents a huge benefit for the rehabilitation of health. And on the other hand, this technological accelerated process applied to health has generated a complicated environment for sanitary support in providing public health and assurance that are tangible in order to promote and protect public health with transparency and governance, and a constant demand of new records of medical devices or registration of medical devices is a huge challenge. So it is really a complicated a kind of mesh that is going to allow all of us to really sit and figure out how can we apply these good regulatory measures in order to not have so many challenges. It's been very difficult. Digitation is a consolidation process, and it's applicable precisely to two elements that are the optimization and simplification in regulatory matters, because this would have to have a result that should be clear regarding the efficiency and opportunity of the processes. And it is also important because the environment is extensive, and in these medical devices, it's also very important to include in the strategies to implement the regulatory simplification, allowing regulatory entities to make valid some efforts that are articulated to be taken advantage by all of us. So at least in COFEPRIS, I could tell you that we have a huge, frank and clear contrast for each new registration of a medication that we are going to have. There are 4 devices. So the demand and regarding the medical devices is greater, for example, than talking about medications. So what do we have to do is the question. We have to go towards a systematization of those elements that could be subject to this. And this has not been simple because we would have to align all of these steps and all regulatory entities have in order to register. Talking about the new registrations of medical devices, we are going to have these elements of alignment so that we're able to have these recognition, bilateral recognition, and in some cases unilateral, and also apply the reliance. And with that, we can optimize time, and with that, we can give certainty to the population, and that we're having direct users. So one of the important challenges in order to specifically for COFEPRIS is the matchup and classification of medical devices to the standards and the way we have classified in the World Health Organization. These instances is because this is possibly the first step that we have to overcome in order to have articulation elements and or joining elements in the medical devices. And maybe you're going to ask us, what does this have to do with digitation? We first have to have this first scenario that has to be very well identified, and we would have to have it accurate and well described. So all of these elements that can have applications in reliance can also go to another scheme of electronic resolution, and that after that they turn into a resolution that is timelier, and they're more expedited and better regulated. So at present, let me tell you, there's elements on its way, and in the digitalization. Uh, so these are not so specific, but they are the first step that we're giving in COFEPRIS towards this conception that we are going to have to migrate to the digitation for all these processes. And going back with the enormous challenge that medical devices have. So this is one of the essential elements that are going to be benefited from this strategy that we have underway in COFEPRIS, that this is the digitization. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for this, and thank you for the intervention. And also thank you for putting on the table the relevance that having systems, operational systems have that would foster the attention, efficient attention of regulatory processes in Mexico. And then we have the COFEPRIS team. I'd like to address the floor to Gabriel Cortez, that is with us in this session and refers to what are the number one challenges regarding medical device regulations, innovative regulations. So regarding regulation, innovative regulatory, and maybe this has to do with a later question, but how does it play? How does the publication guided this year by the OMS, how do we play in good practices in this sector? So thank you so much. Yes, very happy to do so. First of all, I want to check if you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you. And greeting everyone here present and thanking for the invitation to participate in this such important forum. So first of all, the challenges have been mentioned in different points during the presentation of my peers. And one of the challenges in regulation of medical devices is having a sound legal basis that will allow us to speed up the access to medical devices, always ensuring efficacy and safety, and that are at an affordable cost, that they're also affordable, because many times the regulation is late because it brings higher prices, and by delaying it, sometimes it is hard for us to have access to of these devices for the center that should be the center of this topic, that is the patient, of course. And these legal bases should have the right classification that goes from a gauze, a syringe, up to a intraluminal device or diagnosis equipment that are high tech in nature. As mentioned by Nathan Enriquez, the amalgamation to good regulatory international practices that gives us an access of where to go, of course, and fostering techno surveillance that is also very important, and visualization of a software as a reality in medical devices. We cannot stay just thinking that the software is part of a utopia or a foreign future, because it's already in the equipment that we already use for that already have a sophisticated software, and we have to ensure that complies with some regulations and applies to the international norms, definitely. So the same way, we have to establish good practices on storage, distribution, use in and reuse in some of the cases, and we also mentioned by was mentioned by Monica Telles, and we always have to take into account that these good practices guides are going to take us to a better management of these devices from their conception up to their final until we throw them out. And least but not less important is the training of human resources of the regulated, and to be at the same level of international standards and at the same level of the demands that the world has at present regarding medical devices and the regulation of medical devices, considering that Mexico is one of the main producers and exporters of these devices, and most of the ones that are produced are exported. So it's also of vital importance to be at the same level of the knowledge in this regard on behalf of the regulated parties. So this would be my intervention, and I consider these are very important challenges in this regard. And thank you so much, Gabriel, for your intervention. And if you could turn that off so we don't have echo. Thank you so much for your intervention and taking advantage of the intervention of a high-level COFEPRIS officials. I'd like to also address a question on the fact of how can we match up these definitions. And as mentioned here, how can we see the monographies, the regulations, in order to understand efficiently this diversity in the sector of medical devices, given that the universe of medical devices is very extensive and has different variations? How can we match up these definitions, these monographies and regulations, and what is the role that international rules have and practices of reliance in this process? So here, I'd like also to refer to Felipe Ángel de la Sancha, that is also with us in this session. He is the head of the Pharmacopoeia in Mexico, and he is the executive director of the United Mexican States Pharmacopoeia. And if that is the case, I'd like to give the floor to Cofepris and Nathan, and Rafael Hernandez of the Pharmacopoeia, in case they have any other point here. Yes, thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay? Yes, we can. So here, The first point is thanking the invitation to participate in this forum because it's very important for me, and it's very important to show the use of voice because, as mentioned before in the presentation, and as an executive director of the Pharmacopoeia of Mexico, we also and I also had the National Center of Pharmacosurveillance. So therefore, one of the most important tasks I have is the technosurveillance and is the surveillance of the medical devices. So what I wanted to say as an answer to these questions is that the first thing that could happen is using the word complexity, and associated to the complexity, I would say the word reliance and the practice, the trust practice. So medical devices are a listing of products that is very long and very complicated, and it has different technologies, it has different natures, but we all of them require a definition as a whole. They require a definition, a global definition, and this is what we are trying to solve through the regulation in COFEPRIS and through the regulations established by the Pharmacopoeia of the Mexican states as an advisory body of the Ministry of Health that my colleague Rafael Hernandez has made use of the floor on this regard. So when we have a system or a scheme that is so complicated on medical devices, and when aside from that, we associate these to weaknesses for their surveillance processes. So, because differently from medications where we have a ruling access that is called DigiFlow, that is a system that is owned by the World Health Organization that allows us to give the proper follow-up of adverse reactions of medications in the case of medical devices for adverse incidents. We do not have a tool of the same nature and power in a way that this is a topic that is so complicated and so diverse that here the reliance uses a very important place and is associated to the reliance. We also have efficient communication between regulatory bodies so that we can have precisely timely information, and we could have the proper timely surveillance that is also efficient. And a second word that comes to my mind as a response is the word differences, because there are differences, meaningful differences between the regulations in Mexico and the international regulations. So yes, we do have to acknowledge that through sanitary regulations, and in particular through the pharmacopoeia of the supplement for medical devices, that is already a strength that we have in our country. So yes, all of this is aligned with international rules and regulations, with the ISO rules, with the World Health Organization, with the IMD. We also have to acknowledge that there are differences also. One of the examples that I can place in this sense is the field of the contrast media. In the contrast media in the world, they have been classified within the group of medications. In the case of Mexico, they're classified as medical devices, and a similar case of international discrepancies is the case of radiopharma. So in this sense, we also have in Mexico the necessary task to be able to review and align our medical device catalog with the international catalog of medical devices and eliminate those differences. So another important difference that is not minor, but is also very meaningful, is in the fact of the classification rules, because the classification rules in Mexico, as of the input for health, foresees three levels, foresees three possibilities, whereas the international regulation and the regulations of the World Health Organization, of the Pan American Health Organization, are considering four risk levels. So now what we have in COFEPRIS is to do a work in order to align ourselves to these regulations, international regulations, and for sure, this is the third word that comes to my mind as an answer to you, because in Mexico, the task we have is the updating task. So we have mentioned three words: the complexity. Associated to the complexity, we have a strategic, very important tool that is reliance, and the differences that we have, and try to abide these differences. And to that, we come to terms of for updates, and uh, from COFEPRIS and surveillance, internal surveillance, is the need, is the regulations in order to be aligned internationally, as from the side of the pharmacopoeia in the United Mexican States. And Rafael would like to use the floor in order and so to dwell on this topic. So this is the answer so that I could give you to these questions, and we need to understand these definitions and specifications and the monographies, because we are in a situation that is better, and because we have a very intense activity in the world of pharmacopoeia, and one is one for the World Health Organization, and the other one, we have an exchange of information that is very intense, because this is a more intense use now in these times of COVID, and that allowed us to have, as Rafael mentioned, monographies for the antiseptics, and that have been published in the new edition of Pharmacopoeia that is going to start on the December 3rd. So I think this way I would be giving you to an answer, and to the commitment of COFEPRIS, of the National Center of Pharmacosurveillance. And so in the alignment, according to international rules, we're making good use of the topics of reliance. And Rafael, would you like to make any additional comments? So I would like to give you the floor. Yes, thank you so much. And maybe I would like to add with the two comments. And the first of them is that, yes, effectively, we are working with the regulations, with the rules and regulations according to our legal framework regarding health. And also in medical devices and in inputs that we refer to the three levels of risk classification. Nevertheless, if we do, we see the vision and we see the rules and regulations of other places, effectively, we could continue with the same line that we have at present as the pharmacopoeia is having it. And COFEPRIS is looking at it, that is identifying the gap that we have versus other regulations, and then we would work on them. And that's how we have worked very well. However, if we open our vision and we say that it's also necessary to do the adaptations in a greater things, this is a very important moment. And the engineer also mentions the point that maybe some of the categories that we're having are not functional, and we have seen them in the intervention. We would have them so we would have this categorization for medical devices. This is an imminent need. We have to do these adaptations, and in that sense, the Permanent Commission of the Mexican Pharmacopoeia as an organizing body has the necessary elements to base itself in order to do the proper contributions to the regulatory framework in order to allow us, after grounding the specific rules and regulations, that we could do the proper adaptations. And my second comment on making already a clear exercise of how are we working this in our country is the case of the norm 244. Once we have these manufacturing practices of medical devices, it's one of the most complete and complicated in the world. Complete because it includes, and it includes so many points that when we match up against other norms, the scope of 234 in one place includes what other instances address it in different norms. For example, everything that is related to the quality matters have to do with having an ISO in the world, but here we're embedding the part of the quality control, and this is we're capturing this here. But when we add other things, it's also very interesting because we could also acknowledge the fact that it complies with the rules and regulations, and then we simplify these so I think it's been functional, and I think it is good to emphasize that there's exercises that have been successful, and there's where, and thank you for the confidence amongst the regulatory entities, and secondly, because our resources are limited, and because of being limited, it allows us to get and reach better results with resource optimization. Thank you so much. And finally, to conclude, I would say that the ruling access of these initiatives that we have in COFEPRIS are precisely the principles of good regulatory practices. And what do I refer to the principle of representativeness in work teams? I mean, the public inquiry mechanisms, as well as the resolutions made by consensus based on scientific criteria, the mechanisms of openness to ensure all of these players in the different stages, the permanent review that allows us to publish annually updates of the contents of pharmacopoeia, and this is a strength for related to transparency, because the process is based in internal rules of the Permanent Commission and the norm 001, and also on the reliance practice of cooperation and international cooperation. So I hope that with this intervention, I have your question has been properly answered. I want to thank you very, very much to the engineer de la Sancha and the engineer Rafael Hernandez. And I also, we're running out of time, and I would like to take advantage, aside from thanking you for how detailed the answer was and how valuable the information that was shared to us, and that we want to thank you for that, give the floor to conclude to the representatives of the productive sector with the last question regarding the difficulties that they perceive, or the conditions where they perceive that initiatives are being promoted in order to promote and international harmonization. What are the difficulties that you perceive in the medical device, in the industry of medical devices, in order to adapt yourselves and in order to adapt yourselves to the regulatory modifications in order to look for an international harmonization? And there are here a couple of questions. At least there's three questions that I was able to identify in the chat. Those that have questions, please ask us at this point so that we're able to ask the questions as soon as as the last question is answered. And also, I would like to thank each and every one of the presenters that have intervened in order to respond to the previous questions. I'd like to give the floor to Jorge Daniel from Canifarma so that he can give us his opinion about this last question. Jorge, please go ahead. Yes, thank you, Ricardo. Can you hear me okay there? Yes, we can. Thank you. Thank you so much. So to start, I would like to thank the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence for their attentive invitation to be part of this panel of the National Chamber through myself. And I'd like to start by mentioning that the industry of medical devices established in Mexico has asked for many years, has fought for regulatory convergence, allowing us to find harmonization schemes according to international standards. In that sense, we've been very clear when we've promoted in different forums the need of creating and strengthening the path that will allow us reach this goal. This process has involved the need of working together and to be sensitive not only in the established goals, but also according to all the players that participate in regulatory matters in order to visualize in the strategic manner the importance of adopting these standards. So with that, I'd like to share with you the industrial sector I represent is prepared in order to work in an agile manner in this migration according to international standards, because we're certain that this strategy will allow us to work in a more harmonic manner in the industry and authority relationship in order to strengthen the main end of the players, that is the health of patients. Nevertheless, it's also important to mention that the most important challenge that we see in this exercise is the lack of a strategy that will define precisely what are the steps that must be followed to reach this harmonization. And we've checked all of these schemes and that have tried to follow these modifications. And unfortunately, many of them have not achieved the goal because of the absence of a joint scheme. And we identify totally and we value the possible impacts that are positive as well as negative. And so we feel is important. This path has to be followed it has to be worked for, because according to international standards, we have to obey. Uh, so we have to foresee what is the environment of the country that is going to be part of these exercises. The first point is the knowledge, the exact knowledge of how the project is going to take place. And the project can be done only through trainings, and the second is the sensitization to see how important the project is. And we're going to achieve so through clear publication. And the third one is the legitimation of this strategy that can only be attained through this joint effort that allows all the parties involved will know where we are and where do we want to go. Any of the schemes that do not involve a synergy that will assure optimum results will represent for all of us the possibility that the efficacy of the harmonization scheme will not achieve the results. This joint effort should involve necessarily a previous analysis that will allow us to identify what are the points that we can work on in the adoption and which have to be worked on in a second moment to be able to be harmonized immediately. We cannot forget that the legal scheme that should go hand in hand with these actions is not simple and makes us comply with processes in many of them, and it allows us to have So as a result, this exercise represents, like in anything else, a multidisciplinary work that will assure that the speed in its implementation will not break away from the norms and will make difficult the execution. And it's also very important to acknowledge the work that has been done by a national regulator lately, and the work they've done is excellent. We are fortunate enough to have a COFEPRIS that is committed to quality, honesty, and good results. Nevertheless, has great empathy to the modernization of the work schemes strongly leveraged on a sound regulation infrastructure. I would like to close my participation by leaving very clear the following message: that the medical device sector, and that we're all in the same symphony, and we're all, as a result, ready to kick off with the harmonization of international standards, because we know that that will allow us to modernize the regulatory scheme. We also have the strengths of our technical teams and the support, but necessarily we require that the regulator would walk hand in hand with us and would adjust and have the great support that is required to balance the understanding of a dynamic, innovative, and growing industry that is also aware of the importance of this work. And international harmonization is going to be a success, as well as we're all aware of the benefits it brings to us. As we remember, regulation not only obeys to the compliance and observance of the articles, but it also consists in perfecting constantly this regulation that is always defined according to the needs of the patients. Thank you so much, Ricardo. Thank you, Jorge, for your comments and for your perspective of the camera, of the chamber. I'd like to give the floor to Alma Ricalme to tell us, what does she think about this last presenter? Yes, of course. Again, thank you so much to everyone for listening to me. And according to what Jorge says, that we have worked many topics related to medical devices as one sector, because we believe is the only way of coming and making it and giving a unique and matched a message to the Ministry of Economy and all the involved players. Companies established in Mexico, no matter their origin in capital, we're all aware of the importance of regulatory practices. And by having to compete in external markets, we're constantly revisiting our own production, storage, distribution, and quality processes to be successful. In this sense, and I have been working since 2018 with this wonderful sector. For me, and I want to say respectfully, is that every time a norm is not created according to good regulatory practices, and believe me, since 2008 that I'm in this sector, we're one of the sectors that have fought more and looked for the Ministry of Economy and COFEPRIS to be able to be regulated according to the norms that exist in our sector. Every time this is not done according to good regulatory practices, we remove the industry established in Mexico to compete against other countries, or even in Mexico, considering that our country is one of the ones that have more free trade agreements with the world, not only with the United States and Canada, they have the Pacific Alliance. We also have other markets that are as powerful as well. So if we're not aligned, we have to create processes that are ad hoc to Mexico. I mentioned that, but I'd like to re-mention it. These are challenges regarding quality, costs, and investment, but they also represent a rework for the sanitary authorities, because something that has already been validated in other countries with the same regulation that COFEPRIS has, it causes rework regarding relabeling, regarding storage, and other practices. So the non-alignment of norms in Mexico would mean greater problems in adaptation, and also to abide by international standards that already exist. And in this sense, I can see, and I'm going to take my notes because I wrote down a few concepts and words that were very powerful mentioned in this meeting. I see with great pleasure that through the Químico Hernandez, that he mentioned the improvement in processes, in infrastructure, and in internal norms, and in the contents also. I also celebrate what was mentioned by Dr. Cortez. I celebrate what was mentioned throughout all of this forum, but I took specific notes about this topic. And the good regulatory practices mean even affordability of medical devices in Mexico for the benefit of patients, and the concept of reliance. How can we know things? By knowing things, we're committed, but at the same time, we have the trust generated through the robust regulation system that exists in Mexico and the world for our sector, but also through the concept of techno surveillance. How implemented in the market can we revisit the product in terms of security and efficacy? So finally, I'd like to mention a term that has not been mentioned in this session, is the differentiation of medical devices
Es algo que tanto Jorge
versus
como
other sectors. And as me and other people in this medical device sector are constantly putting ourselves putting ourselves as everybody else, and also the authorities, because here, as we cannot have a norm, and in this sector, there's always new norms internationally, because there's always a way that we have to add up to other sectors, and that generates lots of problem. And so we were heard about the topic, and medical device, a refrigerator for the use of electrodomestic. And these understandings are the ones that could generate greater efficiency, putting in the middle of the conversation the Mexican patients. Thank you so much. And that is all on my behalf. Thank you, Ana, for the messages. And they also help us round up the different interventions done today. So with nothing further, I would like to go to the specific questions. And the first question in the chat, so in the session, and it refers to if there is any tentative date for the review of the NOM 240 on technosurveillance. Is there any answer on this question on behalf of the authorities?
Hola.
So, hello, Ricardo Aranda. The 240 is the one that is in effect. The 241, that is the medical devices one, is the one that has to be published very soon. And so the surveillance, Mr. La Sancha, is being reviewed. And thank you. Thank you so much, Miriam, for the clarification. And I suggest that those interested parties are ready to look at the tools that mentioned the general norms of National Infrastructure Quality Program, whose elaboration and publication in itself represents the application of good regulatory practices, to know what is the outlook, in this case, next year for the regulatory agenda in Mexico. Now, I would like to go to the second question, and it is very necessary for the implementation strategies to be open to improvements through the feedback of those regulated with enough channels that are open and traceable. And with that, what are the actions that are going to be taken to this end, because the support email is not effective according to this feature. So I don't know if this is a specific question aimed at one of the present authorities. I think it has to do with the work that is being promoted, and in order to implement the quality assurance. But I don't know if COFEPRIS would have something else to say, or the general norms direction would have to say something. So I'm opening the floor for anybody's reaction.
Muchas gracias, Ricardo.
Thank you so much, Ricardo. I'm Juan Carlos Rivera. I'd like to take the floor. If there's anything related to the comprehensive assessment program that is the SINECI that at present is being migrated into practice. I'd like you to send us an email if there is anything that has to do with the system and the norm catalog, and we're at your service. And thank you so much. He gave us his email. Thank you, Juan Carlos. I don't know if there's any other comment. And if there's no other comments, I'd like to go to the next question. And in the line of questions, they included December 3rd for the review of the NOM 40. That would be the publication of the review project that you're referring to. And right now, if there's any additional clarification, we're attentive. The next question refers to reliance. COFEPRIS has, aside from digitation, a plan to update legislation regarding, and I understand this is a question, and because we don't have a question mark, but is being signed, and they point out in medical devices, the documentation in the country of the manufacturer and it can have an alternative free sales of an authority of reference because of the globalization and strategies of supply and without putting aside efficacy and safety, but having access to the national health system. And so I want to know, so on behalf of COSEPRIS, is there any additional component to the digitation in order to update the norms and terms related to reliance? So I'd like to give the floor to COFEPRIS. So dear Ricardo and all those that asked the question, yes, within the process on digitation, aside from all the logistics and the strategy that has to do with the, we are detailing the analysis of the case and the new norms and medical devices. And together with that, we see the applications of the reliance and the different layers. One of them can be done from bilateral agreements, others with the knowledge streets tasks, and there's many opportunities within medical device sectors that are going to start knowing once we have listed them. Rest assured that all the changes we do are going to be communicated to you without any problems. Thank you so much. Thank you for the answer. And now the General Regulation Office of Norms talked about it, but I'd like to give the floor to Sandra so we can go to the conclusions of this session. And I would like to enormously thank the opportunity of moderating such an important panel. Sandra, I'd like to give you the floor back. Ricardo, thank you so much. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you to the panelists. Now we're going to give step to the closing comments. Miriam, can you help us with that? And then I would do the final closing of the event. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sandra. We just wanted to thank each and every one of our panelists for their participation in each of the sessions that we have had in this workshop of good regulatory practices. And so from the beginning, these represent, and this is the beginning of many activities that we have to develop in the project with the NDRC. And we are going to notice all of these that is being carried out together. So we'll continue with more topics to support all the implementation of a good sanitary regulations in the topic of medical devices. And we are going to create different trainings. And I think this is a very important point that we've mentioned in the different sections, include the quality of our patients. And this is a goal where we're all focused. And these type of workshops help us get to know and be informed about the certainty of how are we articulating this work for the well-being of our community, reduce obstacles to trade. This is key to strengthen our health system and improve the protection of health of our patients regulations, improve public administration and transparency, and with all the organization. And I hope the effort of this training and bring it to all the people involved and its instrumentation and compliance with rules and regulations, we would be fruitful in each of the areas, and of course, in the proper development of our regulatory system that is national as well as global. I would like to thank for all of our participants, to all the attendees that have been presenters, to administrative personnel that helped in the organization of this event that you know is now of the important challenges that we're living with all the virtual events and hybrid events that we're carrying out. Thank you so much to Alexandra from the OPS that helped us with his valuable organization, Juan Carlos, Viviana, Ana, Jorge, Rafael, our commissioners, Latan, Gabriel, Monica, our pharmacosurveillance and technosurveillance heads that fight in order to protect all the products that are in the market, Mr. De La Sancha, Dr. De La Sancha and Rafael from the Pharmacopoeia, as well as each and every one of you that have participated in the sessions. Thank you again to the representatives of the Alliance for the USA Norms, to ANSI, to the coalition, the American Coalition, for all the sessions that we're having regarding feedback, and to all and each one of those that have addressed the floor with their messages. Thank you. I'd like to reiterate the support of our federal commissioner. This topic is worked within. This is an important challenge for our country, but we continue working on it. Thank you again. And Daniel, please. Thank you, Miriam. And now I'd like to give the floor to today on behalf of USAID, ANSI, the Inter-American Coalition for Regulatory Convergence under the framework of regulatory convergence for medical devices. We want to thank the participation of each and every one of the panelists, each and one of the speakers and people that got trained that will allow us to continue in this same path of regulatory convergence in order to support so that COFEPRIS can progress in this agenda. The discussions that we have had in these sessions have opened up the opportunity to develop accurate joint work with regard to increasing compliance of the national and international commitments with regard to good regulatory practices, capitalizing, of course, the multi-sectorial tasks in order to develop capabilities to exercise in an efficient manner the co-responsibility of all relevant players in the development of regulations, and in particular of our sector, as of the drive that the World Health Organization has given recently to this topic through the publication of the Guides of Good Regulatory Practices for the health sector. I'd like to take advantage to tell you that you can find this document in particular translated into Spanish by the coalition, also translated in Portuguese in the coalition's website. And additionally, and another topic that is very, very relevant, we feel we are having great areas of opportunity regarding the trade organization and opening up to do the necessary adaptations to find the alliance according to international rules. This allows us definitely to confirm an ongoing continuous spirit and abide by the legal demands from Pharmacopoeia. We're very happy to know all the efforts that are being done in the different spheres of the government to progress in this path of convergence, and reiterate the commitment of the coalition and all the private sector to continue supporting you. And finally, I'd like to thank all the technical team and the interpreters that have been with us throughout this training. Thank you so much to everyone. We are going to be sharing with you about the details of the following events that we'll be organizing under the framework of this regulatory convergence framework. Good afternoon, Miriam. Thank you so much to you and all the team for the effort and commitment to bring these events to a good ending.